And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge, back once again with another YouTube video, and in this case it's another one about the New 52 and specifically another deep dive into some, I guess, slightly technical and detailed nuance about the New 52, which, as with so many things, surprises me that other people don't know. A little while ago I did a video about every single appearance of the character Pandora in the original issue 1s from September 2011 when the New 52 launched. And the reason I did that wasn't because I thought it was especially complicated, but because literally nowhere on the internet had done that. There were a couple of guides online, but they were basically incomplete, which I always think is weird. And as usual, if something isn't on the internet and I have the information, then that's, I guess, what YouTube is for. So again, I'm making this video because something needs to be said and isn't on the internet, and hopefully it'll be a good resource for other people. Specifically, what I'm going to talk about is the fact that when it comes to the Batman issues in the New 52 that was specifically the Death of the Family arc, somehow not many people know that the single issues and the issues collected in the various collected editions actually had different dialogue. DC went back and made quite a few rewrites. Now, there are a couple of things on the internet, a couple of Reddit posts and a couple of bits and pieces where people talk about this, but people have at best identified like maybe a dozen different dialogue changes over those 5 issues. The truth is, there are 62 edits that DC editorial made to Scott Snyder's writing and dialogue over those 5 issues, and nowhere on the internet has an even vaguely thorough overview of what those changes are. So I thought, with no further ado, I should do one here, and I'm going to do one here. So to start with, before we dive any further, what I'm just going to say is massive spoiler warning. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about the Death of the Family arc in Batman. I'm going to be talking about the issues, about what happens, about the twists, the turns. There's no way I can't do that. So if you haven't read this story, and if you have yet to read this story, don't watch this video. This really is for people who have read it and read it in one format or another and may not realise that what they've read is literally only one side of the story. So, what do I mean by the collector's editions? Well, what I'm showing you here is a picture of Volume 3, Death of the Family, so Batman during the New 52, and that is one of the collector's editions that you can buy. That's the standard cover there. What you can see here is the, I want to say, slightly limited edition cover. It's essentially still a hardcover. So the one on the left, the black one, is the paperback cover and also potentially a hardcover. You can buy either of them if you want. But there was also a limited edition hardcover with this white cover with the Joker's face on it that had this really cool acetate dust jacket you could slide off. And if you slid it off, underneath you'd see the Joker's sort of tendons and veins and sinews. It was really cool, really sinister. As well as that, there is the actual Death of the Family collector's edition, which is actually called Joker Death of the Family, not Batman Death of the Family. And that's the cover you can see on the right. These are all the different trade collections you may have read. There are some others we'll talk about right at the end, but these are the 3 main sort of standard size hardcovers or paperbacks that people will have read Death of the Family in. And unfortunately, there are quite a few points where the dialogue in these collector's editions was changed from the single issues. So no further ado, I'm going to talk you through the single issues. This is Batman 13, 14, 15, 16 and 17. Those are 5 issues, and the various moments in them where there was dialogue that was in the single issue that said one thing, and then in the trade collection it said something else. There are 62 examples. I'm going to try to rattle through them. This is going to end up being another long video. Grab your favourite snack or drink. Let's get straight into it. This is the cover of Batman issue 13. With the Batman half-face motif. Most of the tie-in issues in the Bat family that were part of this Death of the Family crossover had the half-face motif as the cover, at least for this issue. So the very first thing we're going to look at is this thing here where Gordon is speaking to Bullock, and as you'll see, there's been a tiny change in the dialogue in that in the single issue he uses the word hell, and in the trade collection they remove that. Slightly bizarre because on the same page lower down he uses the word hell as well, but whatever. DC are kind of mercurial. That was on page 4 of the issue 13. Moving on to another part of page 4 of that issue, slightly lower down the page, we've got a bit where again the word hell gets removed from this box, bizarrely enough. Moving on to page 9, we've got this scene between Bruce and Alfred. The dialogue changes slightly, but most importantly, the attribution changes. In other words, in the single issue, you can see it's Bruce talking and then Alfred talking, then Bruce talking. But in the trade, they change the actual structure of the bubble, so everything is being said by Alfred, and then Bruce comes in at the end. Moving on to the next page, page 10, we've got Damien talking a little bit. Now, in the single issue, he just says something like, he slinks off to lick his wounds and comes back and steals his face. Whereas in the trade collection, it's referred to as he comes back and steals his old rotten face from the GCPD icebox. A bit more detail, and that's what the trade has there. Moving on to page 13 of that issue. Again, issue 13, we see here there's a little bubble of writing in the little black text. That's Bruce talking, and he just says, Jokers. It's the old children's gag. In the trade, it actually says, they're Jokers. That's the only difference there. Small. Does it make much difference? I don't know. Sticking with the same issue, on page 14, we've got Bruce talking here, and in the single issue, whilst he goes, it's all right, this is between him and me, in the trade, he just says, I'll handle him, which I kind of prefer. It's a little bit more sinister, a little bit cooler. Moving on to page 21, you've got this character here with the red helmet on, and in the single issue talks about being knocked off a catwalk, being bathed in fire and burning away their false skin, whereas in the trade paperback, that third bubble is removed and it just goes straight into talking about his skin beneath his skin. Moving on to page 22, in the trade paperback, there's a reference here to the Court of Owls. You know, you can't even stop a bunch of old birds from roosting in your spires, whereas that reference is taken out in the trade collection. Well, that moves us on to issue 14 of Batman, but that's already quite a lot of dialogue changes. Diving into issue 14, on page 8, we see here actually something that I would say the single issue made a mistake, because here it has the word with twice, and in the trade they correct that. It's obviously a typo. The word with shouldn't have been there twice. So this is one of the examples where the trade is superior to the single issue. Moving on to page 11, in the trade you've just got Batman saying, just come Jim, and then in the single, that's what he says. In the trade, Gordon asks him whether or not he's got a tranquilizer gun. Looking at page 14, we've got some slight difference in the dialogue that Dick Grayson says. In the single issue, he just says, you don't know they can't handle it. In the trade, he says, you don't know that they can't handle it, just let them in, Bruce. So slightly longer dialogue there. Moving on to page 16, you've got these bubbles here, and as you can see, it's just a little bit more text fleshing out what's going on. Talking about kind of like the blood thinner that Joker's used, and just kind of adding in sentences like he's leaving you clues in his poisons. That was added in for the trade collection. On the same issue, page 18, you've got this moment here where the Joker says, what, no hug, no kisses, not even a batarang to the head. In the trade, they get rid of the kisses and they just say, no, how you been? We're going to see a lot more of this over the rest of this video, in that the subtle sexualization of Joker, and especially this bizarre kind of psychopathic codependency between him and Batman, gets downplayed quite a lot in the trade collection. Same issue, page 21, you've got quite a lot of differences in dialogue here. The Joker basically refers to himself as a faithful court jester, which gets taken out in the trade collection. And suddenly there's a bit more in terms of the dialogue he talks about when it comes to making Batman strong and all these other kind of various weird little sort of affectations that he has. He also refers to the rest of the Bat family as Bat Kiddies, and then in the trade that also is a reference that gets removed. And then in page 23 of that, there's again quite a substantial change in dialogue. The single issue says quite a lot about Batman keeping a secret from people, how he's kept it, and so on and so forth. And then in the trade, they kind of trimmed that down a little bit and just changed Joker's dialogue there. Page 27 of this issue is quite an interesting change, in that the single issue refers to Batman as the God King and refers to the Penguin as the bishop for his clergy, essentially. Whereas that is actually removed in the trade collection. On the same page, there's actually a phrase there where the Joker makes quite a creepy comment about licking blood off umbrellas. They remove that in the trade, which makes Joker slightly less creepy in this scene. So was that the right call? I'm not sure. We're now moving on to issue 15. And in issue 15, on page 3, we've got this moment here where in the single issue, the Joker's like, I love it when you talk dirty. Again, they tone that down to just him saying, that's the spirit, get angry in the trade. Similarly, in page 4, he refers to Harvey Bullock as a big boy in the single issue, whereas he just refers to him as a gumshoe in the trade. Again, on that page, in page 4, in the single issue, he makes a kind of like semi-sexual comment towards Batman about drawing the curtains, tying a sock on the door whilst they get into it. Whereas in the trade, that's removed, and he just says, you read my mind. Again, kind of dampening down the evidence of his obsession with Batman. On page 5, they just changed some of the dialogue here slightly. They're just adding a few speech boxes. I'm not really sure why. I don't really think it adds anything in the trade, but that's what they do. On page 6, there's a point here where they just add an exclamation mark. In the single issue, Joker is like, oh, hurt me, kind of declaratively. Whereas in the trade, they put hurt me question mark. Just changes the tone slightly. On page 7, all they do is just change the way that he refers to Batman. In the single issue, he calls him Bats. In the second issue, he doesn't call him Bats. Sorry, second issue. The trade, sorry, he doesn't call him Bats. If we're looking at also low down on page 7, there's a point here where he says that his kiss captivates, stops people in his tracks, and is full of love. In the trade collection, they just say it's full of devotion. Looking at page 13, there's a point here where the Bat family is talking, and they just changed the dialogue here. Dick Grayson talks about his Joker's attack on Rhea, someone from prison, an enemy of Dick Grayson, not Nightwing. And Barbara Gordon talks about her mother. Whereas in the trade collection, both those references are removed. On page 14, there's a slightly psychedelic scene. All they do again is change the attribution. It's still a speech bubble being spoken by the Joker, but in the trade, they have it so the Joker says it slightly earlier than Batman's reply. I don't really know what difference this makes in terms of how you read comics, but I'm not an expert in how comics are made. When you get to page 17, there's a point here where the Bat family are talking to Bruce, and they say, well, it looks like you're doing his work for him in the single issue. But in the trade, they say, it looks like you're doing his work for him because you keep secrets from us, but not from him. So again, that's an improvement in the trade, I think. Here we're looking at page 16 of this issue, and there's a bit here where Bruce goes, say what you will, all I've been trying to do here, the only thing is to protect you from that. In the trade, he then says, I'm trying to protect you by doing this myself. Please stay away and stay safe. Leave Gotham. So, again, a slight change in the tone and the sentiment there. Page 18 of this issue, got Nightwing saying, you train us to be heroes, Bruce. You train us to fight evil. Bruce says, not him. In the trade, he goes, you train us to be heroes, Bruce. Let us in on the plan. Let us help you take him down. And Bruce goes, not with him. Page 27 of that issue's got a really weird panel you can see here with the Joker's eyes. The single issue has got a lot of text here, whereas the trade has virtually none. I don't know why they removed that text and that dialogue, but they did. Then you have page 28, loads of text here in the single issue, and in the trade, virtually none. Again, very strange that they took all this out. Now we move on to issue 16. With this distinctive cover, and page 2 at the bottom has got a panel in the single issue where the Joker says, shh, don't be distracted, darling. And in the trade, they remove the word darling. Going on to page 3, there's a point here where the dialogue changes very slightly at the bottom. They're talking about monstrous love in the trade, and then just normal love in the single, but then the single, he refers to him as Bats, and in the trade, he doesn't. So, again, DC editorial, I guess. On the next bit, on page 11, in the single, Joker refers to Batman as my dear. In the trade, that is taken out, although the love letter is still called a love letter, oddly enough. On page 16, the Joker refers to himself as faithful court jester, but in the trade, he just refers to himself as little old me. On page 17, there's a point where he uses the line, you'll be free as a bird, but for some reason they take that out in the trade. I don't know why. Is that because it's a Court of the Owls reference, or is it a Superman reference? Was there a copyright issue? God knows. On page 18, there's a bubble here where he goes, if I squint my eyes, it's like you're wet behind the ears, fresh out of the cave, you almost had me. But in the trade, they just say, really and truly, you almost had us. Again, they're taking that quite a bit there. Here on page 19, there's a bit where Batman says a particular bubble, and then in the trade, they also add in him adding the words, now let God Freeman go. On page 20, there's two major changes. The first one is this one. In the single issue, Batman just says the words no, and there's a very small bit by the Joker at the top. But in the trade, there's a whole blurb by the Joker right in the middle of the screen. Lower down that page, this is the single issue where the Joker says the word yes, and then there's a bit of text at the bottom. But on the trade, the Joker doesn't say the word yes, and instead the blurb at the bottom finishes, so he talks about Batman keeping up a farce. Again, strange change. We're now moving into the last issue. This is issue 17 of Death of the Family, and this is the denouement, which is in every single Death of the Family trade collection across all the different lines, be that Batgirl or Nightwing or whatever. So for this one, on page 2, it's got a 9-panel grid with lots of weird little text panels. This one, in the single issue, says, it's okay, it was scary for me to shh, you're safe, which is kind of creepy. In the trade, they remove that. They remove what Joker says. Again, on the same page, there's a bit where he refers to Batman as darling, and they remove that in the trade as well. In the single issue, Batman at this point just goes, I'll destroy you for this. But in the trade, he does an almost Grant Morrison like, in about 6 seconds, I'll be free and I'm going to break every blah, blah, blah. It's a very Midnighter type bit of dialogue. I don't really think it's appropriate here, but it's what they picked for the trade. Then we get to page 8. There's a reference here to the love that they share. But in the trade version, they change it to the bond that they share. Once we get to lower down on page 8, there's again like a change in one of the top blurbs that the Joker is saying here. Again, is it a good change? Is it a bad change? I don't know. It's about peeking behind the curtain, keeping the game afoot. I don't really know why they make these sorts of changes, but they do. Next, again on page 8, there's a thing about Batman not wanting to admit the truth and the bad news of his own soul. They remove the reference to a soul in the trade collection. We've seen this already. Not only they're removing sort of like semi-sexual references, they're also removing semi-religious or semi-blasphemic references. Going on to page 9 of this issue, there's quite a lot of text here from the Joker talking about being in their headquarters and so on and so forth. Basically, I'm not going to read it out because I'm not a voice actor, but the dialogue is quite substantially different in the trade, as you can see here. It does allow you to see more of the art, but quite a change. Similarly, when you get to lower down on page 9, there's a whole bit where he talks about how Batman knows that he can get to anyone in his family and he just leaves the doors unlocked. Whereas in the trade, the language is actually slightly creepy. He talks about letting people creep in over and over at night and refers to them as kiddies. So again, seems slightly better there. Interestingly, lower down on that page then, when he talks about the Bat family in the single issue, he uses the third person, hoping I get him and him and him again and him and her. Whereas in the trade, it all goes to the second person to get you and you and you again and you and you. So that was a stylistic choice, I guess. And again, on that page, like I say, this is all on page 9. There's a point where he refers to Batman as darling and says, in the end, you're the one who wrote this for me, darling. Whereas in the trade, he asks, you want to know who wrote this thing for me. So changes the actual meaning of the dialogue as well as that kind of sort of darling intimacy sort of language. This one I'm not even going to bother reading out. Basically, this is the panel in the single issue. And then this is the panel in the trade. Loads more dialogue. Like, this is ridiculous in terms of the amount of changes that they have. Again, on page 10, you've got this change in dialogue. And again, it's pretty substantial. I'm not going to read it out, but the trade has a lot more dialogue than the single issue has. And it's different, quite substantially so. Here, when we get to page 18, we've got, again, some slightly sexualized dialogue from the Joker, talking about picking his corsage off the ground and being talked back into Batman's arms. Whereas in the trade, it's just about blowing out the candles and wrecking the whole thing. On page 21, a bit of a change in dialogue. And again, it's for all the things that we've seen already, which is just kind of about removing references in the single issue to love or darlings, or like how far they're going to go, or these kind of like sort of subtle uses of almost date night language. Well, I really like this difference. So in page 21 in the single issue, Batman, again, it's all about the language. He goes, I'm going to whisper this right into your ear, darling. Whereas in the trade, they remove that. He just goes, I know all of it. The trade is much weaker in my mind here, but again, I really like the single issue dialogue. The next page, the single issue has got this little box, who you are underneath the grin, whereas the trade doesn't have that because the preceding dialogue, as we've just seen, is very, very different. On page 22, the trade has got some very simple, lean dialogue, who you really are under there, whereas the trade collection has got a whole load of dialogue, which I think kind of makes it a bit, I don't know, it messes with the tension and the timing, because you really want to kind of dwell in the tension of the moment, and all this dialogue kind of gets in the way of that. Anyway, page 22, again, the single issue, nice lean dialogue. The trade, loads of dialogue. And the Joker getting a bit more frantic, which again, I didn't really enjoy. And then here in page 23, what you've got in the single issue, Batman saying no as the Joker falls. But in the trade, he doesn't do that. And again, I prefer it in the single where he says no to kind of show that he wants the Joker to live, as opposed to the silence that he has in the trade collection. Towards the end of that issue, we're now at issue 26. There's some very subtle changes here. In the single issue, Alfred asks, what is it, sir? In the trade, Alfred goes, sir, are you sure you're all right? And of course, in the single issue, as we can see, Bruce is the one with sort of the attribution of the ellipses, the 3 dots, whereas in the trade, everything is coming from Alfred. On page 26, there's again just some dialogue about Bruce talking about the events of what had happened, and it's just being worded quite substantially differently, and it's actually quite a different sentiment with different language in the trade issue as well. I think I prefer the single issue, but again, feel free to freeze frame, flick back and forth, and decide for yourself. This is the very last and 62nd dialogue change. This is on page 29 of issue 17, and in the single issue, he asked Dick what the Joker said to him in the dark, and essentially he just goes, it doesn't matter, I'll see you around, Bruce. Whereas in the trade, it doesn't matter, he didn't say anything, Bruce. We didn't even know he was there. Personally, I prefer the trade for this because it's just, I don't know, it's got more pathos, it's just more memorable. The truth is, the plan was that there was going to be a lot of teasing about what the Joker told each of the members of the Bat family that was going to play out over the coming year or so of comics. But then, essentially, DC editorial kind of moved away from that, and they were like, do you know what, we're just going to tie up this plot thread and just have it that Joker never said anything to them. Which I can kind of get. I mean, these are editorial decisions. So there we have it, the 62 differences in dialogue over those 5 issues, from the single issues to the collected editions. If you've only ever read the collected editions, you haven't read the entire story. If you've only ever read the single issues, you haven't read the entire story. At this point, I'm just showing you on the screen the Batman omnibuses which have come out. Here are some reviews from the channel Name and Condition, which obviously I always recommend and promote. And Name and Condition is a great channel. There's a lot of great overviews for a lot of great comics. They've got good overviews of the Volume 1 omnibus and the Volume 2 omnibus. Death of the Family is in the Volume 1 omnibus, as you can see lower down here. And in the omnibus, it has the same dialogue as the trade collections. For those of you that are a fan of absolute formats, not to be confused with the Absolute Universe, there is an Absolute Batman Death of the Family hardcover with a really cool kind of acetate slipcase. Acetate slip jacket that goes over the slip case, which is very, very cool. And this essentially is what the standard size trade trade hardcover comes with. If you do have the Absolute Edition, again, you have the trade collection dialogue. Whether or not you're happy with that, whether or not you want the single issue dialogue, entirely up to you. But buying even the most deluxe version doesn't mean you've got the full story. So there we are, and there you have it. Hopefully that was interesting. Like I say, I looked online to see if anyone else had talked about this. No one had. I think the best I found was a reference on DC fandom to about 15 different dialogue changes. There aren't 15, there are 62. And to come back to the thumbnail for this video, the question really is, what are you going to do? I personally have all the single issues. I'm debating custom binding them, but whether or not I do that comes down to whether or not I actually custom bind all the single issues, or whether or not I actually mix and match my favorite bits from the single issues to the trades. Because like I say, sometimes there were typos in the singles that they fixed, and sometimes the trade was better, like the very final panel I just showed you. So what do you do? Do you make a custom purely of your single issues? Do you stick with the trades in the various versions there are, the paperback, the limited edition hardcover, the standard hardcover, the event book, the omnibus, or the absolute edition? Or do you mix and match the two, which is kind of tempting? I don't know, but if you're a completionist and you're a fan of the Death of the Family, hopefully this was useful. Hopefully this was interesting. I do have a couple of questions for you. Well, firstly, like, how on earth did you stay to the end of this video? This is a long video, but thank you for that. The questions I have are this: have I missed any? Are there any changes in the Death of the Family trades versus the single issues that I wasn't aware of and that I missed? I'd be really interested to know. Secondly, has anyone noticed this happening in any other events in the New 52? If so, please hit me up and let me know below. And what do you think? Are you interested in making your own custom bind? Were you aware of any of this? Let me know your thoughts. As always, thank you very much for watching. As always, I really appreciate your support. And as always, until the next time, stay classy.
All right, thanks for watching, everybody. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. As always, please follow me on Twitter at I am Thomas Judge, where I will post a daily review of whatever comics I've been reading. You can get an idea of what I'm up to on the channel. And as always, please support the channel by heading over to Amazon.com and checking out my prose novel about superheroes. It's a completely original piece of work. The first episode in it is called Arrivals, and the series as a whole is called No Gods or Kings. You can find an excerpt of that on my website, nogodsorkings.com. Until next time, everybody, stay classy.